Welcome to Hope Talks podcast with Grayson Willis and Pastor Margaret Michael, where you'll hear inspiring stories that are filled with hope and good news in Jesus Christ. You can also search for our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and TuneIn. We would love your feedback and invite you to take a short, anonymous survey. You can find the link to the survey in the show notes.
Welcome to today's broadcast of Hope Talks. We are so grateful that you've tuned in today. I am Pastor Margaret Michael, and I'm joined by Grayson Willis. How are you today, Grayson?
I'm doing good, Pastor Margaret, and I'm thankful for technology because even though you're not here, we can still have a conversation together. I mean, we're on the radio, so if I wouldn't have said that, people might not even know that.
That's exactly right. Well, I want to tell you, I'm grateful for technology too. We have a great guest with us today we're excited about. That on that vein of technology, I am sitting here looking over from Mole Hill to the west to the mountain range. And it is such a beautiful day. And I'm blessed that our pastor allows me to work while I caregive for my dad. Some during the week, and it's been a real joy to be able to be here and still to be able to engage in my responsibilities. So grateful for the church we work in. And just speaking about that, talking about the church today, we're joined by Beth Suhr. Beth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. It's always good company with the two of you.
Well, we're so glad that you've joined us. We always want to give stories of hope. That's what we're all about, is bringing hope to a world that needs hope in these days. And sometimes we can be going through our life, and our life might feel a little mundane from our perspective. But in God's economy, it's never mundane, and it's nothing's in vain, right? And so we just wanted to talk today about serving. And Beth, you're PK, right? Pastor's kid.
Yes.
Pastor Jim Harrison and Deb, great parents. And I can assure you that you've been in a lot of churches in your life.
I have. Yeah. It's been a joy, too, to watch them serve in different capacities in different places. They really have done it from a sense of calling. And I think it's just been a privilege to watch that and to learn from them over the years. So,
well, I have certainly learned a lot from both of them myself. Pastor Jim, working alongside him, I learned a lot about shepherding and caring for people. And he can remember more than I will ever read. I just don't have that memory. And he's been such a gift over the years, and your mom, such a servant.
He has
just last week.
He has a great memory when it comes to Bible verses, but if he has to find his keys or his cell phone, it's a different story.
Well, we can't have it all, can we?
We can't have it all.
So, Beth, maybe start out today. Like I said, you grew up in the church. Your dad was called to ministry as a young man. Pretty sure he passed out in the pulpit the first time, but we won't go there. But from a young age, he was called to serve, and he's been a role model. He's been an example of a servant. And so talk about just growing up. If you're a pastor's kid, you get there before everybody else, and you leave after everyone's gone, right?
Yes.
On a Sunday morning.
Yes. Yeah. I was born into that life. He's been a pastor my whole life. He was supposed to retire a couple of years ago, and he's still at it, which is probably good for him. But yeah, it was just part of our life, being in church and involved in church. And I don't think we really knew any different. And I remember Sarah and I used to sing songs from the stage. He's still working on me, and Have You Seen a Wiggle Worm? All those real classic songs. But we just kind of grew up with that and didn't really know any different. And I think watching them serve day in and day out, it was just something that I respected, and then have kind of felt called to step into myself and my own. I don't work at the church, as my career or my full-time job. But as part of a church, I feel like even more so recently called to give back to where I'm at. And I feel like that, has different, there are different reasons for that. And there are different ways that God uses that. But I think God's been preparing me for that my whole life. And I think he prepares all of us for service. In different ways. Mine just looked more obvious, growing up, seeing it done in a church setting. So,
So thinking back as a child, what was the first thing you did? You've already told me you were on the stage singing, and that doesn't surprise me. But how did you serve in the churches as you grew up? What were things that you desired to do?
Gosh, jogging my memory on this one. I remember, being part of the kids programs, singing some specials with my sister from the stage. There were plays that we were a part of. I'm sure if we were short an usher, we would help take the offering. Some cleaning, after everything shut down, if stuff needs to be picked up or put back where it was before, just so that it's ready for the next time the doors open. We would do that, make sure all the doors were locked. Church is really dark when all the lights are turned off. It has a very different feel to it. And probably got a little bit underfoot of whatever Dad was doing. But I think, too, something that we did that I kind of just happened naturally, and I wasn't even aware we were doing it. This is, back when, and I guess some people still do this, but we got invited over to people's houses on a regular basis for lunches and dinners. And we would sit and talk with people, and we would be in their homes. And we learned at that time how to have conversations, how to eat what's put in front of you, whether you liked it or not. But what I don't think I realized at the time is that we were also ministering to people. They were ministering to us by being hospitable and providing food and welcoming us into their home. But we were ministering to their hearts. And I don't think I even realized that at the time. As kids, I think it was really special for kids to come into your house. And so we enjoyed that. I guess as we got older here at Harrisonburg, we went on a couple mission trips. Those were ways that we served.
You were in the youth band, weren't you?
I was in the youth band with Mandy. And
really?
I was. And Drew David, the David Boys, and Chris Lee. And we played Pharaoh every time we got the chance. Youth band. I was on the youth council, Nazarene Youth Council. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's what we called it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we went to meetings at district assembly and those kinds of ways in the church. I also helped at my school. I led the chapel band at school and participated there too. So
So when you moved away and went to college, is that what you're talking about? Did it continue there?
It did continue there. It did there. I was part of a traveling worship team at Olivet. I went to Olivet Nazarene University. And we went to different churches, not every Sunday, probably once a month throughout the semester, and would lead their worship service. And so I did that probably two out of the 4 years of school. And I enjoyed that. It tested me a little bit differently. I think I led the team there, and that just felt different. It felt a little bit weightier, like more responsibility.
Yeah,
in a good way. Probably, I'm sure it was challenging for me. And let's see. Then I moved back to Harrisonburg. I did work on staff at the church for about a year and a half. Helped with a youth band there. There's this theme happening that kind of surrounds music and all of that. But I think up until in those points, it felt like I was a little bit I was in these small ponds, and I never really, I think too, I was young enough that I never really questioned my abilities. Like I never really thought, I don't know if I'm good enough for this. And I think I went through a season of that when we moved to California. We were out in California for about 9 years. And we started working on a college campus, and we were at a church there who had this really well-established music program. And I think I was getting older and starting to realize I'm not as good as everybody else on stage. Like they are really talented musicians, and they are able to do all of these things. And I think kind of doubt started creeping in. And so I really took a hiatus. I really didn't help out or serve musically, probably from the time I left Harrisonburg in 2008 until about 2015. I hardly even picked up my guitar. I think I really was afraid. I was afraid that I wasn't good enough. And in 2015, there was a women's conference, and they were desperate for somebody to lead the worship. They didn't have anybody lined up. And I think it was, in a couple of weeks, and I was just having this conversation with someone about it, and I was like, well, I kind of play the guitar. I don't know if you really want me to have me, but I think it was almost because I saw their desperation. I thought, well, maybe that means that I would be okay because they don't have anybody else. And I think obviously these are probably tricks of the devil really getting into your mind and telling you that you're not good enough to serve in certain ways. And I think I missed out over the years because of that. And so anyway, I led worship for the women's conference. I had a friend play with me. She played the cajon. And it really just reignited this love for music, love for worship specifically. And I was able to do that 2 years in a row while we were there. And so we moved back to Virginia probably the next year. And I remember one Sunday, somebody saying, we'd been here a while, and, I wasn't raising my hand and saying, I want to help on the worship team. But I remember somebody saying, we're looking for people for our worship team if you are interested. And I just felt this kind of tug at my heart. And so I tried not to ignore it. If I ignore it, usually I can push it away, right? Like we can push down those tugs on our heart long enough that they disappear, right? And so I think I responded as quickly as I could before I chickened out, and got to meet with Aubrey, and then got to move forward with that. And really, it's the most I think I've ever been involved regularly in a church with a team, and I've learned so much. Not just musically. That's feels like it's not the least important part. Obviously, you have to learn how to play and how to sing with a team, but just watching how some of our leaders lead out of humility. I think, especially watching how some of our leaders lead with humility. In particular, one coming to mind is Pastor John. He is at the East Rock campus with me, and we have this small team of people, and he is just so intentional about checking in with each of those people on the team and making sure that, he's not overscheduling them, which is hard to do when there are only 8 of you. But then taking our worship evenings on Thursdays and turning them into this really special time together. He's doing devotions beforehand and praying with us. And it really becomes a time of worship for us as we're preparing to lead the congregation. And it's just been a beautiful thing. So I'm just glad that the Holy Spirit prompted me to get involved, and I'm glad that I said yes when he prompted, because I think I would be missing out,
So, Beth, I was listening. I would go back to the time you were in California, and there wasn't anyone to lead, and there was a desperation. And I was just sitting here thinking about that, like how intentional and gracious is our God to allow a void to happen
in a place that was typically like musically overflowing. They had all of these people that were so talented, and songwriters, and an entire college to pull from. And so, a void where there shouldn't really have been a void.
But you were getting ready to move back here, and before that happened, he brought your song back.
Yeah.
And you were
beautiful.
You were talking also about how the enemy tried to tell you weren't good enough, and that's the importance of, knowing the voice of God and knowing the voice of the enemy, and making sure we listen to the voice of God. Because if you would have listened to that voice, you might not be leading worship today and helping lead and serve. And the devil knows too. He knows the Lord has a plan for us, and if we obey that plan, that's the best for us. And that'll give us life. Serving him gives us life. Like we're serving the church, but also the Lord is helping us use the gifts that he's given us for the good of his kingdom, and just the importance of obeying that nudge, like you said.
Yeah. I think too, kind of along those lines, Grayson, it's in our weakness that he shines the most, right?
Yeah.
So I was reading a book before I came in today called The Valley of Vision. And there was this one particular section that I just wanted to read. It says, "Help me to rejoice in my infirmities and give thee praise, to acknowledge my deficiencies before others and not be discouraged by them, that they may see thy glory more clearly." It's in our weaknesses that he shines, that his glory is shown through. And so actually we delight in our weaknesses, because the more that we are, the more strong that he is able to be. And I just thought that was really a different perspective. You know, I think sometimes when we're serving, we can focus on those things that we aren't really good at and actually talk about them or highlight them and highlight those things as a bad thing. But really, it's our weaknesses that that then push God to the center. Right. It makes it about him, and he gets the glory for it.
That's right.
It's in our weakness that he takes our weaknesses and turns them into strength, not because of us, but because of him. He can use our weaknesses, like you said, because it's not about us, it's about him, and he's the one that shines through that.
Right.
You know, when we think about ministry, I think none of us feel qualified. And I love that saying that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And again, like, it doesn't need to be a pastor. We all have, we've all been gifted as believers with spiritual gifts to give and to serve the church with. And I love the fact that today we can take that thread of your life that is attached to song all the way back to you was a little girl waiting on your dad, worshiping on the platform, whatever the song was, you know, and just all the way through as a child in plays and musicals and as a teenager and in college and young married. You and Garrett were there at Biola. And so it's just, you can pull that thread the whole way through your life. And so now you're back in Harrisonburg. You've felt the nudge and you've said yes. And you have shared that you're at the East Rock campus. And, you know, here in 2020, we said, hey, we're going to open a campus in Elkton, another campus of the church. And you can share that journey, but you're now there with Pastor John and helping lead worship. And before we started recording this morning, I made a comment that you helped plant that campus, and you pushed back a little bit against me, right? Because you'd never really thought of that. But God just continues to use that gifting that he has given you. He's continuing that gift of worship and an opportunity for you to help lead others to worship the Lord. Tell us about that now that you are at this campus. And what is that? Like, we don't get to go there every Sunday.
Yeah. It reminds me a little of some of the churches I grew up in. It's a smaller community. And so there's something really intimate and special about that. My kids run around like they own the place.
Like you did.
Which I may have done myself. But people just smile at you when you walk in because they know you and they're glad you're there. And God always shows up too. I wanted to say it is almost without fail that on Thursday evenings when we leave practice, we kind of look around at each other like, well, that's the best we can do tonight. Hopefully it goes better on Sunday. And on Sunday, it is so humbling when God takes these meager offerings that we bring, and we try to piece together with our own strength and our own ability on Thursday evening, and he orchestrates them on Sunday. And I mean, Sunday happens, the people show up, they sing with us, and God comes and he is present with us. And sometimes I am overcome by that, and you can see it happen. I have to stop singing on the stage because God shows up and he really takes these small little pieces that we've brought and he puts them all together. And that is cool. And that is, it's another reason why I love to be a part of it, because it's the most I really get to feel him present with me in such a tangible way. So I love that. That's one of my favorite parts.
And it's so beautiful because I've heard people say, you take a tree and it looks beautiful in the fall, the leaves are all pretty. And beautiful from a distance. It was just the most beautiful tree. And the closer you get to that tree, the more you see in every leaf there's a defect. There's no perfect leaf. You take an orchestra, there's this beautiful music that comes when they're all playing. But if you drill in, there's not one perfect person singing, right?
Right.
And I think that's the beautiful thing. A worship team comes together and, you all come, and just like every other person, you come in carrying your hurt and your pain and the joys of the week and the sorrows of the week. And you come to worship God in the midst of all of that.
Right.
It would be easy for people to say, well, they must have it all together because they're there.
Which would
but
be
we all
so
walk,
far from the truth. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But we all walk in with our own ideas of places that maybe we feel that we don't add up, that we don't measure up. And we all walk in that way.
Yeah.
But when you show up, you've said yes to God, and He's faithful and in being strong when you're weak. Because we hear that weakness part on Thursday night, right?
Right.
But it's when we're obedient and step into what He has for us that He loves to show up and make that happen. Take the offerings that we bring and make them into something beautiful.
Yeah.
Kind of think of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. The boy offered that. It didn't seem like much, but God took it and fed 5,000 people plus, those are just the men, so 5,000 men plus the women and children with that offering.
Right.
And so
Right.
what might seem little to us is a lot to God.
And at one point, the disciples, Jesus told them what to do with the loaves and the fish, and they didn't understand because from man's eyes, that doesn't seem possible, right? But they had to take that step in obedience, even though they didn't understand it, and then see what He did from that,
Right.
Yeah. Beth, today we have people listening from all over, from many different denominations. Maybe some people, they haven't stepped in the church. We have no idea. But what would you say to someone today that maybe is holding back? Maybe it's been since COVID. Maybe they've never been willing to step out and say yes. And they're listening and they're going, what if I would have? And I think God restores what the locusts have eaten, right? He likes our obedience in the present. What would you say to someone that maybe holding back or maybe afraid that their gifts aren't as great as someone else's, so they're not serving in their church or maybe even walking into it since COVID?
I think I would say that the church needs all kinds of people. It needs people with a whole spectrum of different talents and abilities and levels and time available. And I mean, one of your greatest contributions could be that you have the time available to help, And I would say that if you're feeling a tug on your heart, to take the first step and respond to it and see where it goes. And it's always that first step. I think that's the hardest for me. It's that reaching out. It's that kind of, it's a vulnerable place. It's putting yourself out there. And so I think that's the hardest step. But take the first step and see what happens and see what God does. Usually the second step is easier. And then before you know it, I mean, Pastor Margaret, you're kind of laying out for me that this has been something in the making my whole life. And I had never considered that. Like, I'd never considered that the piano lessons I took in second grade were gonna come back to benefit me later, to help me later, or whatever. So and it's all about each little step. And I think that builds up. And you don't have to be the greatest at something right away. It's entering in to the story where you're currently at and being part of the narrative from there.
Beth, as you were talking about, your best skill might be your availability.
Right.
And I've heard the saying before, the best ability is availability, and just being available to be used by God. Maybe you feel like you don't have any special gifts or talents, but I'm sure God can find a place wherever your church is, whatever the need. We've talked a lot about worship today, but, there's children's ministry, youth ministry, greeters, tech members, ushers, you mentioned that. And so just being available to be used wherever that place might be in your church.
Right.
Just being willing to be used by him is important, I believe.
Right. And I think God uses you stepping in. Sometimes it's easy when you're sitting on the sidelines, it's easy to kind of critique what's going on inside. And I think once you step into and begin helping, I feel like God starts to break down those, some of that negativity in your own heart. As you begin serving, you start to see these different places that you can make changes, or you can help fill a need, or you can, you know, and he starts to work on you and show you kind of where you maybe were critiquing incorrectly.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that sometimes if we don't understand the processes and what's happening, the enemy can use that to bring division.
Right.
And make us believe the worst instead of what God calls us to do, which is to believe the best.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other part, we have to understand that as much as God has a plan for us, so does the enemy. And, you know, the enemy's plan is just not to be in God's plan for any of us. And I think one thing that I heard, Beth, that I really want to pull out, because I think it is the sweet spot of volunteering, serving. We do it and we think, I'm going to do this and I'm going to bless that ministry. Sometimes, you know, I'm going to give my gifts. Like I know going on a mission trip, you know, we think we're across the ocean and we get there and we receive a blessing.
Right.
That blows us away. And what I heard from you was at East Rock on Thursday night, you are ministered to and you're part of a family.
Absolutely.
You have this intimacy of friendship and of sisterhood and brotherhood that would not be evident in your life if you wouldn't have said yes to serve.
Absolutely.
And that's what the enemy doesn't want for us. He doesn't want us to actually build meaningful, whole relationships that are godly. I felt like that's something I don't want to miss in what you're sharing with us.
Right.
Because volunteering is just not volunteering to volunteer, but it's to become part of something bigger than us.
Right. It's time together. It's deepening our relationships. I remember for the Hunt to Harvest banquet that we did recently, my husband, Garrett, who actually is the one who enables me to be able to come on Thursday night for practice and come Sunday morning for practice because he is home with my kids. So there's a whole nother side to this that really could be talked about. But he showed up for the Hunt to Harvest the night where they wrapped the goose poppers and he just talked about how those that showed up that night sat around and chatted and laughed and conversed with each other. And I feel like that is something that we don't get the opportunity to do very often, but that happens when you're volunteering together. It takes your relationships to a deeper level.
Yeah,
and
it really does.
It's a benefit for you almost. So it feels a little bit like you're volunteering and you're getting this benefit out of it, but it's beautiful. And so I think you're right. I think that is the sweet spot.
Yeah. Beth, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being willing to serve wherever and however God wants to use you. Just anything in closing that you would like to share with us?
I would say that if there are particular areas that you feel like you are drawn to or have a passion for, to reach out and talk to somebody about those and see what the needs in your church are. Each church is going to have its own different set of needs. I remember one Sunday we were in the lobby at our church and Pastor Julia, our children's pastor, came up to us or up to me, I think, and said, I need you in children's ministry. and it kind of felt like I was like, right now? She said, no. But in the future. And I think she was almost saying like, I don't have people that are stepping up to volunteer. And so she had to start reaching out to people herself. And I would say to ask and to say, where are the needs and can I plug myself in? Because I promise you there are needs there. If it's not in the church building, there are needs ministering to people outside of the church building. But to ask and then to plug yourself in to one of those and see if it's a fit. And if it's not a fit, then see if you can find a place that is a fit. But just to get involved, I promise you, your relationships will grow deeper. God will minister to your heart while he is using you to minister to others. And it will be a blessing for you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Great words there. And thank you for joining us today. It's been great to have you.
You are welcome. I was glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to today's broadcast of Hope Talks. We pray that as you've heard us talk with Beth Suhr about the importance of serving, that it truly has been a half hour of hope for your life. May God bless.
Hope Talks is sponsored by Church of the Nazarene Harrisonburg in partnership with Sunshine Ministries.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast of Hope Talks. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe for updates in the latest episodes. Also, if you're in the Harrisonburg-Rockingham County area, we invite you to listen on the radio each Sunday at noon on 1470 AM or 102.1 FM WBTX.